Imagine, if you will, that the date is February 27th, 2026.
Right, just a perfectly normal day.
Exactly. I mean, global tensions are simmering, which, let's be honest, feels like a permanent state of affairs at this point.
Right. Yeah.
Oil prices are doing their usual, dance of fluctuation.
The standard geopolitical noise.
Yeah, the standard noise. Diplomats are supposedly sitting at mahogany tables, hammering out negotiations. Everything just seems tense, but normal.
But it wasn't.
No, not at all. Because in secret, the world is literally hours away from a conflict that will completely reshape the Middle East, cripple global supply chains, and, usher in this terrifying new era of AI-driven propaganda.
It was an absolute paradigm shift, really, the kind of event where you remember exactly where you were when the news broke.
It's like looking up at a clear blue sky and having it turn pitch black in the blink of an eye. And that is exactly what we are unpacking today for you, our listener.
We've got a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. We have been handed an absolute brick of a Wikipedia dossier covering the 2026 Iran war. We are talking about this labyrinthine conflict involving the United States, Israel, Iran, and just an intricately woven web of regional proxies and allies.
And it is dense material.
Super dense and highly charged. It involves actions and viewpoints from multiple nations and political figures that people feel very, very strongly about.
Which means we need to set some ground rules right out of the gate.
Yes, absolutely. So before we even start, let's be clear. We are not here to take sides.
Right.
We aren't endorsing any political party, left-wing or right-wing. We aren't here to judge the actors involved.
Our only job today is to take this massive stack of information and impartially break down exactly what happened, how it happened, and why the geopolitical chessboard will basically never look the same.
That objective lens is so critical here. Because if we want to understand how the sky over Tehran suddenly filled with missiles on February 28th, we can't just start the clock on that morning, can we?
No, not at all. You don't get an explosion of this magnitude without a very long, very volatile buildup. We really have to look at the decades of pressure that built this powder keg.
Right. The historical context just goes incredibly deep. The timeline provided to us in the source actually drags us all the way back to 1953.
Which is the absolute foundation of modern U.S.-Iranian relations, really.
Okay, so take us back there. What happened in 53?
Well, in 1953, you had the Iranian Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh. He made the fateful decision to nationalize Iran's oil industry.
Which had previously been controlled by the British, right?
Exactly, yeah. And in response to that nationalization, the CIA and British intelligence orchestrated a coup.
Operation Ajax.
Right, Operation Ajax, to overthrow him and basically consolidate power under the Shah.
So you have a foreign superpower literally restructuring your government just to control your natural resources. It's not hard to see how that instills a permanent generational paranoia into the political DNA of a country.
Oh, absolutely. It created this deep-seated narrative of foreign interference that directly fueled the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The Shah was overthrown, the Islamic Republic was established, and you had the infamous hostage crisis at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran.
That was the moment diplomatic ties were just completely severed.
Completely severed, yeah. But to understand Iran's modern military posture, like why they fight the way they do in 2026, you actually have to look at what happened immediately after the revolution.
The Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s.
Exactly.
See, I always thought of the Iran-Iraq War as just a brutal, drawn-out stalemate. But you're saying it fundamentally altered their entire military strategy.
It defined it, completely defined it. During that war, the United States actively supported Iraq and Saddam Hussein, and the combat was just horrific.
Like World War I style trenches. Right?
Yeah, trench warfare, complete with the widespread use of chemical weapons by Iraq against Iranian troops. But the real turning point for Iran's military doctrine was what they called the War of the Cities.
What was that?
Well, Iraq began launching relentless SCD missile attacks directly into Iranian civilian centers, places like Tehran.
And Iran couldn't respond in kind.
Right. Because of international sanctions, Iran's Air Force, which was largely made up of aging American planes bought by the Shah years earlier, it was falling apart.
Oh, they couldn't get spare parts.
Exactly. They lacked parts, they lacked maintenance. So they realized very quickly that if they were ever attacked again, they couldn't rely on a traditional air force to defend their airspace.
They needed a different kind of deterrent.
Right. And that realization birthed their massive ballistic missile program.
That makes so much sense. If you can't fly a bomber over an enemy city, you build a missile that can reach it within your own borders.
Precisely. And from the 1980s onward, they start engaging in proxy conflicts. They begin funding and training groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, and eventually the Houthis in Yemen.
Forming this, what is it, the axis of resistance?
Yeah, the axis of resistance designed to counter American, Israeli, Saudi, and Emirati influence in the region.
Okay, so that establishes the mechanics behind their military buildup. But the real modern tension, like the actual fuse attached to the powder keg in 2026, is the nuclear dilemma, isn't it?
Oh, the nuclear program is the absolute centerpiece of the modern conflict. The existence of Iran's covert nuclear facilities was revealed way back in 2002.
While ago.
Yeah, over 2 decades prior. And that led to years of intense diplomacy, culminating in the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action.
The JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal.
Yes, the JCPOA. And the mechanics of the deal were pretty straightforward, actually. Iran agreed to severe restrictions on its nuclear program and rigorous international inspections by the IAEA.
And in return,
the crippling economic sanctions against them would be lifted.
But then, in 2018, U.S. President Donald Trump withdrew from the agreement.
Right, he withdrew and instituted a maximum pressure campaign.
And that strategy carried over into his second term, because by September 2025, the UN reimposed sanctions using something called the snapback mechanism.
Back.
Yeah. This is where I need you to explain the mechanics to me, because honestly, it sounds like a bureaucratic maneuver, but the source material says it absolutely crushed the Iranian economy. How does this snapback actually work?
It's a fascinating and highly controversial legal mechanism. When the JCPOA was drafted, the negotiators included this clause stating that if Iran violated the deal, any participating party could trigger a snapback.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning all the old UN sanctions that were lifted would automatically snap back into place, and no single country on the UN Security Council could veto it.
Wait. But the U.S. had already formally withdrawn from the deal in 2018. How could they trigger a clause in a contract they were no longer a part of?
That was exactly the argument made by European allies, as well as Russia and China. They argued the U.S. had no legal standing whatsoever.
Because they left the deal.
Right. But the U.S. argued that because they were listed as an original participant in the foundational UN resolution that endorsed the deal in the first place, they still possess the legal right to force the snapback.
Wow. That is a brutal piece of legal hardball.
And it worked. By December 2025, the Iranian currency, the rial, experienced a catastrophic collapse. Food prices spiked. Foreign assets were frozen tight.
The U.S. Treasury Secretary actually called it the grand culmination of their strategy.
They considered it a massive success.
So you have a nation whose economy is being systematically asphyxiated.
Yeah.
And what does Iran do in response?
They start playing their own game of hardball.
Exactly. In February 2026, they informed the IAEA that they are stopping inspections at facilities that the U.S. had actually bombed a year prior.
During that brief skirmish known as the 12-Day War, yes.
Right. And this leads to this concept of nuclear latency, which seems crucial to understanding the justifications for the 2026 war.
It is absolutely crucial.
I've been thinking about this, and the best way I can visualize nuclear latency is through baking.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Imagine you have all the ingredients for a cake sitting out on your kitchen counter. You've got the flour, the sugar, the enriched uranium, so to speak.
Right, the raw materials.
Yeah. You aren't actually mixing the batter. You aren't turning on the oven. But you want everyone who walks into that kitchen to look at the counter and know that you could bake that cake in 20 minutes if you really wanted to.
That is a highly effective analogy. In geopolitical terms, analysts called this hedging.
Hedging?
Yeah. Iran was enriching uranium to higher and higher purities. They were stockpiling the raw materials and developing the ballistic missiles to deliver a payload.
But they purposefully stopped short of weaponization.
Exactly. They didn't actually build the bomb mechanism. Why? Because the ingredients on the counter are the ultimate diplomatic leverage.
Ah, I see. They can offer to put the flour back in the pantry in exchange for sanctions relief.
Precisely. Without ever having crossed the ultimate red line that would guarantee a full-scale invasion.
But there's a massive regional complication to this strategy: Israel. The material points out that Israel is widely believed to possess a sizable nuclear arsenal of its own.
Estimates range anywhere from 90 to 400 warheads.
But they maintain a strict policy of nuclear ambiguity. They never officially confirm or deny that they have them.
Which creates a profound psychological and strategic double standard in the Middle East. You have scholars arguing that Israel's unacknowledged arsenal actually created an invisible arms race.
Oh, that makes sense. From Iran's perspective, they're surrounded by U.S. bases and facing an adversary in Israel that quietly holds hundreds of nuclear weapons.
Right, so Iran develops a latent capability to establish a balance of deterrence.
But from the perspective of the US and Israel, an Iranian nuclear bomb is an existential threat that simply cannot be permitted under any circumstances.
Not under any circumstances, no.
Now add to this volatile mix the fact that in January 2026, Iran experienced massive domestic upheaval. We're talking about the largest anti-government protests since 1979.
And the response from the Iranian government was brutal.
Yeah, they massacred thousands of their own citizens in the streets just to maintain control.
And geopolitically, those massacres provided an opening. The Iranian regime suddenly looked incredibly vulnerable. They were internationally isolated and distracted by internal chaos.
And against that backdrop, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu began aggressively lobbying President Trump for a joint preemptive military strike to take out Iran's leadership once and for all.
Which brings us to the defining debate of the war's origin.
Right, because the IAEA, the global nuclear watchdogs, they stated there was no evidence that Iran had an active, structured program to actually manufacture nuclear weapons.
They hadn't turned the oven on.
They hadn't turned the oven on. Yet, in his State of the Union address, Trump claimed Iran was actively developing missiles capable of striking the United States, which, the dossier notes, contradicted domestic U.S. intelligence reports at the time.
It did.
So, if the actual intelligence didn't point to an imminent threat, why strike?
Because the calculus changed. The U.S. and Israeli leadership decided that nuclear latency, just having the ingredients on the counter, was simply too dangerous.
They couldn't live with the ambiguity.
Exactly. They believed that a preemptive decapitation strike was necessary to force regime change before Iran could ever decide to turn the oven on.
So the U.S. framed it as a necessary action to prevent a nuclear holocaust and free the Iranian people.
While Iran framed it as a fabricated pretext for an illegal war of aggression.
Whatever the true motivation was, all the diplomatic posturing, all the back-channel negotiations that were still technically happening in late February, it was all just noise.
Because on February 28th, the Cold War ended.
It ended with one of the most astonishing displays of tactical deception in modern military history. Let's get into the decapitation strike.
This is where things move incredibly fast.
It's 3:38 p.m. Eastern Time on February 27th. President Trump is on Air Force One flying to Texas. From the sky, he gives the final authorization for Operation Epic Fury.
And the Israelis called their parallel mission Operation Roaring Lion.
But here is where my mind hits a wall. The U.S. had been publicly moving ships and planes into the Middle East for months. They had 2 entire aircraft carrier strike groups parked right off the coast. Hundreds of fighters.
A massive footprint.
Yeah. How on earth do you achieve the element of surprise when you've parked a floating military city on your enemy's doorstep? It's like trying to sneak into a house while driving a parade float with a marching band.
It seems impossible, right? But you do it through a meticulously choreographed campaign of misdirection and spoofing.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, you have to understand how modern early warning systems work. Iran's military isn't just looking out the window with binoculars. They're relying on signals intelligence, intercepting radio chatter, analyzing satellite imagery.
So the U.S. and Israel just fed those systems false data.
Exactly. By creating ghosts. The U.S. leaked fake deployment schedules for their F-22 Raptors, making it look like they were still weeks away from being combat-ready at specific bases.
Oh, wow.
They broadcast false radio traffic, too. Pilots talking about routine training exercises while the actual strike aircraft observed strict radio silence.
Wait, what about the aircraft carriers? They're huge.
They managed heat signatures on the aircraft carriers to disguise how many planes were actually spooling up on the flight decks. They basically gave the Iranian intelligence apparatus exactly what they expected to see, which was a large military force in a state of routine, non-threatening readiness.
That is wild. And the Israeli military took the physical deception to absurd lengths. I want to talk about the scene at the IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv, the Hakiria.
Yes, that is one of the most remarkable anecdotes of the entire conflict.
Okay, so picture this for the listener. You are the IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir. You are hours away from launching the largest combat sortie in the history of your nation, striking over 500 targets simultaneously.
A massive logistical undertaking.
Right. To coordinate this, you need your entire top brass down in the underground command bunker. But you know Iranian spy satellites are taking pictures of your surface parking lot.
Which is usually empty at night.
Exactly. If the lot is suddenly packed with the official vehicles of every general in the army at 3:00 a.m., the Iranians will instantly know something is wrong.
So what did they do?
The generals all commute to work without their official cars. They take civilian vehicles, they carpool, some of them even walk. They literally play hide and seek with space satellites just to keep the parking lot looking half empty.
It was a masterclass in exploiting a false sense of security. And the deception extended to the timing of the strike itself, too.
Right, because historically, Israel almost always executed complex airstrikes over foreign airspace in the dead of night.
It provides visual cover. So Iran's air defenses were naturally on their highest alert between midnight and dawn.
So Israel and the U.S. wait for the sun to come up.
Exactly. They launched the strike in the mid-morning, around 9:45 a.m. local time in Tehran.
When everyone is awake.
Right. They waited for the Iranian leadership to wake up, have their coffee, commute to their offices, and begin their workday. Because the Iranian leadership had been successfully deceived into believing no strike was imminent, they felt secure enough to continue holding high-level in-person meetings.
And the precision of what happened next is just terrifying. The first wave didn't target missile silos, did it?
No, it targeted the leadership directly.
At exactly the same moment, precision-guided munitions hit 3 separate gatherings of top Iranian officials in the Pasteur Street district of Tehran, which is the heavily fortified government sector.
Within 30 seconds, the entire command structure of the Iranian state was effectively erased.
They assassinated the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. And it wasn't just him. The strikes killed the Iranian defense minister, the head of the powerful IRGC intelligence apparatus, the chief of Khamenei's military office.
And several of Khamenei's own family members who were with him.
It was the textbook definition of a decapitation strike. You cut off the head hoping the body dies.
And to ensure the body couldn't react, the kinetic bombs dropping from the sky were paired with a devastating invisible weapon.
The cyber attack.
Yes! A massive cyber warfare campaign designed to sever Iran from the rest of the world and basically from itself.
The internet blackout. I've read about countries shutting down their own internet during protests, but this is an external force turning off a nation's connectivity. How does that even happen? Did they bomb the cell towers?
They didn't need to bomb the towers. They targeted the digital infrastructure itself. They likely went after the Border Gateway Protocol, or BGP, routing table.
BGP routing tables, what is that?
Think of BGP as the postal service of the internet. It tells data packets exactly how to travel from one server to another. If a state-level cyber attack corrupts or deletes those routing tables, the data simply doesn't know where to go.
So the network is physically there, but
it's blind.
Connectivity dropped to just 1% of its normal level for over 60 hours. Imagine that. Suddenly, hospital systems can't communicate, air traffic control goes dark, emergency responders can't coordinate.
Total paralysis.
But here's the dystopian twist that really got me. While the entire country is plunged into a digital dark age, the Iranian government starts handing out what they called white SIM cards.
Yes, creating a segmented internet.
Explain that for us.
Well, the government's core internal networks were hardened against the attack, or they managed to restore a localized intranet pretty quickly. They distributed these white SIM cards exclusively to government loyalists, regime officials, and state media personnel.
Like a VIP pass for the internet.
Exactly. It bypassed the paralyzed public network and connected to the secure state network. It allowed the regime to coordinate their military response and strictly control the flow of information, while the general population was left completely in the dark, panicking under a sky full of warplanes.
And the stated goal of the United States, which President Trump articulated the next day, was swift regime change. The theory was that by eliminating the supreme leader and plunging the state into chaos, the government would simply collapse inward.
But that theory failed to account for the entrenched resilience of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Taking out the head didn't kill the body.
No, it didn't. I picture it like taking a baseball bat to a massive hornet's nest. You take a full swing, you shatter the nest, you might even kill the queen. But the colony doesn't just surrender and die.
The swarm violently expands.
Exactly. It lashes out, stinging absolutely everything in a 500-mile radius out of pure survival instinct.
That's a very accurate depiction of Operation True Promise IV, which the Iranian state media later dubbed the Ramadan War. Because they had lost their supreme commander, the response wasn't a coordinated surgical counterstrike, it was a massive, decentralized, multi-front explosion of violence.
Within hours of the assassination, Iran started emptying its missile silos. And they didn't just target Tel Aviv and Haifa in Israel.
No, they went much wider.
They launched massive ballistic missile and drone barrages at U.S. military bases and civilian infrastructure across Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates.
The whole region.
Wait, let me make sure I'm looking at this correctly. If Iran's primary enemies are the U.S. and Israel, why spend hundreds of multi-million-dollar missiles blowing up oil refineries and airports in neighboring Arab countries who weren't the ones flying the bombers?
Because of the geopolitical architecture of the Middle East, the U.S. projects its military power in the region by utilizing massive bases in those exact allied Arab nations.
Okay.
For example, the U.S. Fifth Fleet is headquartered in Bahrain. The massive Al Udeid air base is in Qatar. Iran was sending a brutal, unmistakable message to its neighbors.
Which was?
We are raising the cost of your alliance with Washington. The logic was simple and terrifying. If you allow the Americans to use your sovereign territory to launch strikes against us, we will view you as a combatant.
Wow.
Your airports, your desalination plants, and your oil refineries will burn alongside ours. It was a strategy of regional hostage-taking.
And it wasn't just raining fire on land. The conflict immediately spilled into the open ocean. On March 4th, we see the sinking of the Iranian frigate, the Iris Dana.
That naval engagement is incredibly significant from a historical perspective.
Tell us about it.
The Dina was sailing in the Indian Ocean, returning from a joint naval exercise with India. It was intercepted by a United States Navy fast attack submarine, the USS Charlotte.
And the Charlotte torpedoed it, which I have to say, sounds like something out of a World War II documentary. But modern submarine warfare is entirely different, isn't it?
Completely different. In WWII, subs fired spreads of unguided torpedoes and just hoped one hit the side of the hull.
Right.
The USS Charlotte likely fired a heavyweight wire-guided torpedo like the Mark 48. These weapons don't actually hit the side of the ship.
What do?
They swim underneath the keel of the target and detonate, creating a massive vacuum bubble that literally snaps the ship's spine in half.
It is terrifying.
It is sudden, devastating, and almost impossible to defend against. The sinking of the Dina marked the first time an American submarine sank an enemy combat ship in active warfare since World War II.
It signaled to the world that this wasn't just a limited strike. This was total, unrestrained war.
Yes.
And back in Tehran, the regime was proving that the decapitation strategy had failed. Because on March 8th, Ali Khamenei's son, Mojtaba Khamenei, who had miraculously survived the airstrikes, was named the new supreme leader.
The IRGC, the military apparatus that really holds the country together, they didn't fracture.
There were no mass military defections. They retained absolute control.
But as they absorbed the damage, their tactical doctrine took a very dark, very desperate turn.
We have to talk about the shift in weaponry. Iran began using cluster munitions. They launched them at Israeli civilian areas, specifically hitting an apartment complex in Ramat Gan, which killed 2 civilians, and another attack in Yehud.
A major escalation.
For those who might not know, why are cluster munitions considered so much more terrifying than a standard missile? How do they work?
A standard high-explosive missile hits a target and detonates in one massive blast. A cluster munition is basically a flying cargo container.
Okay.
When it reaches a certain altitude over a target, the casing blows open and it ejects hundreds, sometimes thousands of smaller bomblets over a massive area, often the size of several football fields.
So it's designed to carpet an area in shrapnel.
Yes. They are devastating against spread-out infantry or light vehicles. But the true horror of cluster munitions, and why over 100 countries have banned them, is the dud rate.
The dud rate, meaning they don't explode.
Right. Often, 10 to 40% of these bomblets fail to explode on impact. They just land in the grass, on roofs, and playgrounds. They effectively become landmines.
Oh my God.
And they are often brightly colored and small, so children mistake them for toys, pick them up days or weeks later, and are killed.
So by firing these into densely populated apartment blocks in Ramat Gan, Iran wasn't trying to take out a radar dish. They were trying to guarantee civilian casualties and sow absolute terror.
Precisely. Neither Israel nor Iran are signatories to the International Convention on Cluster Munitions, so they aren't bound by the treaty. But the shift from targeting military installations to indiscriminately blanketing civilian neighborhoods with terror weapons marked a terrifying escalation in the rules of engagement.
And as the gloves came completely off between the nation-states, the conflict bled across borders, activating that massive network of proxy militias we talked about earlier. The entire region was basically dragged into the abyss.
The axis of resistance was fully activated.
Hezbollah, operating out of Lebanon, immediately declared war, citing the assassination of Khamenei as their justification. They started launching relentless rocket barrages into northern Israel.
which provoked a massive Israeli response. The Israeli defense minister authorized Operation Eternal Darkness.
This wasn't just airstrikes either, was it?
No, this was a full-scale ground invasion of southern Lebanon, aimed at dismantling Hezbollah's command centers in Beirut, the Bekaa Valley, and across the southern border.
The human cost of that specific front was just staggering. Over 4,000 Lebanese civilians died, and more than 1 million people were displaced.
A massive refugee crisis.
Overnight, over 20% of the entire country's population was forced to flee their homes. And it didn't stop there. Down in Yemen, the Houthis joined the fray, firing long-range ballistic missiles at the southern Israeli port city of Eilat.
In Iraq, the Popular Mobilization Forces were targeted by U.S. and Israeli strikes.
And they retaliated by launching suicide drone swarms at U.S. bases in Erbil. The entire map was on fire.
But while the Middle East was erupting, the geopolitical shockwaves were causing massive diplomatic fractures in Europe and Asia. And this leads to one of the most surprising geopolitical developments of the entire war.
The fracturing of NATO.
Yes.
This part truly confused me. The United States officially requested military assistance from its NATO allies. They needed help securing the region, specifically to keep the Strait of Hormuz open, which is the most vital oil shipping lane on the planet.
Right.
And the response from Europe was essentially, no, you're on your own. Why would European countries, who rely far more heavily on Middle Eastern oil and gas than the U.S. does, refuse to help secure the very waterways that keep their economies running? It seems suicidal.
It seems counterintuitive until you look at the international legal framework. You have to view this through the lens of European capitals like Paris, Berlin, and London. From their perspective, the US and Israel had just launched a massive preemptive military strike against a sovereign nation without any authorization from the UN Security Council.
So they knew Russia or China would veto it.
Exactly. But under the UN Charter, specifically Article 51, military force is only legally justified in self-defense against an armed attack, or with Security Council authorization.
And Iran hadn't attacked first.
Right, because Iran had not directly attacked the US or Israel prior to February 28th, international law experts across Europe categorized the decapitation strike as a crime of aggression.
So if a NATO ally starts an offensive war that is deemed illegal, the other NATO members aren't obligated to join in.
Correct. The NATO Mutual Defense Pact, Article 5, only applies if a member state is attacked first. Because Washington threw the first punch, European leaders were politically unwilling and legally hesitant to commit their own troops and ships to clean up a catastrophic mess they believed the U.S. had started unilaterally.
Trump did not take that well. He took to Truth Social, angrily rebuking NATO and even Pacific allies like Japan and Australia, stating the U.S. military was strong enough that it didn't need anyone's help anyway.
But this refusal led to a bizarre, incredibly messy European military footprint in the Mediterranean.
It created a logistical nightmare.
Yep.
The UK, despite political hesitation, allowed the U.S. to use British sovereign military bases in Cyprus to launch defensive interceptors.
But Cyprus is a tiny island in the eastern Mediterranean, well within range of Iranian missiles.
Exactly. The Cypriot government was terrified Iran would retaliate against the island. So you had this absurd, uncoordinated scramble where Greece, Ireland, and Spain hastily deployed naval ships and fighter jets to the Mediterranean.
But their strict mandate was only to defend the airspace of Cyprus from incoming missiles. Absolutely not to assist the U.S. offensive operations.
You had allied navies operating in the same waters, tracking the same missiles, but with completely different operational rules of engagement.
It was chaos. And while all this high-level diplomatic bickering was happening in the open, there was a vicious shadow war going on behind the scenes.
Secret war.
Yeah. The UAE, despite publicly calling for de-escalation, discreetly launched a covert strike against an Iranian oil refinery on Lavon Island. Saudi Arabia also launched unpublicized retaliatory airstrikes against Iranian militias.
Everyone was throwing punches in the dark, but nobody wanted their name on the scorecard because they were terrified of full-scale Iranian retaliation.
But while the politicians debated international law and authorized secret strikes, the reality on the ground for the civilians trapped beneath the conflict was turning apocalyptic.
We have to talk about the human and cultural toll. The U.S. Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, used the phrase death and destruction from the sky. And the statistics are numbing. Over 138,000 civilian sites were damaged or destroyed in Iran.
The blur between legitimate military objectives and absolute civilian devastation was constant. When you're dropping thousands of munitions in urban environments, the collateral damage is going to be immense.
One of the most heartbreaking incidents occurred on the very first day. An Iranian girls' elementary school in Manab was struck by a U.S. Tomahawk cruise missile. Over 175 people, mostly young girls, were killed instantly.
It was a horrific tragedy.
How does a precision-guided missile, a weapon capable of flying through a specific window of a building, accidentally hit a school?
Because a precision weapon is only as smart as the data fed into it. Preliminary findings from the U.S. military indicated the strike happened due to a catastrophic failure in the targeting coordinate databases.
A database error.
Basically, yeah. Years prior, that specific plot of land had been part of an adjacent IRGC military complex. The military moved out, and the local municipality repurposed the building into a school. But the U.S. intelligence database was never updated.
So when the computer requested a target in that sector,
It pulled the old coordinates. The missile did exactly what it was programmed to do. It just flew to a target that hadn't been military for half a decade.
that is just awful. And that's just one nightmare. There was the collapse of the Karaj B1 bridge.
The highest bridge in the Middle East?
It was struck during the Sizda Bidar holiday, which is a traditional Iranian festival where families spend the day outdoors. People were having picnics in the parks directly beneath the bridge when the munitions hit the support pillars. The entire structure collapsed onto the crowds below.
And beyond the immediate loss of human life, we must also look at the cultural erasure. Iran is home to one of the oldest continuous civilizations on Earth. Its history is deeply woven into its architecture.
During the bombardments, over 120 historical sites were damaged or destroyed. We are talking about sites protected by Blue Shield International, which is essentially the Red Cross for cultural property.
Yes.
The Chehel Sotun Pavilion in Isfahan, with its ancient frescoes. The Golistan Palace in Tehran, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Rafiniya Synagogue.
The cultural loss is hard to quantify.
To put this in perspective for our listeners, imagine if a foreign military dropped bunker busters on the Colosseum in Rome or leveled the Louvre in Paris. It's not just the destruction of brick and mortar, it is a violent attack on the cultural memory and the very soul of a civilization. It's erasing proof that you existed.
UNESCO issued blistering statements condemning the damage, noting that the failure to protect cultural heritage sites is a direct violation of the 1954 Hague Convention. And intertwined with this cultural destruction was an environmental catastrophe of unprecedented scale.
The Black Rain.
Yes. The U.S. and Israel heavily targeted Iran's fuel depots, oil refineries, and petrochemical plants. When millions of gallons of specialized petrochemicals burn out of control, they release a massive plume of toxic particulate matter into the atmosphere.
But it wasn't just soot. The rain that fell on Iranian cities was a toxic cocktail of benzene, heavy metals, and what they call PFAS, or forever chemicals. Why are forever chemicals so uniquely terrifying?
Because they do not break down naturally in the environment, and more importantly, they don't break down in the human body. Once ingested, either through drinking contaminated groundwater or eating crops grown in toxic soil, they accumulate in the bloodstream and tissues.
And they cause massive health issues.
Right, they are directly linked to severe immune system suppression, developmental issues in children, and massive spikes in various cancers. The skies over Tehran literally turned black, blocking out the sun, and when it rained poison.
The long-term epidemiological impact on the Iranian population will be measured in generations, not years. UNICEF reported hundreds of children killed by the blasts, thousands injured, and millions traumatized and unable to attend school.
The human suffering was immense.
But looking at this through a cold, strategic lens, it raises a massive sociological question. The U.S. claimed that removing the supreme leader and battering the military infrastructure would free the Iranian people from a tyrannical regime.
But did it?
Right? Did the sheer unrelenting brutality of the strikes, the dead kids at the Minab school, the erased heritage sites, the toxic black rain, did it actually fracture the civilian populace's support for the state, or did it have the opposite effect?
It almost certainly galvanized their resilience. It's a well-documented psychological phenomenon in the history of warfare, going all the way back to the Blitz in London during World War II.
Rallying around the flag.
Exactly. Bombing a civilian population from the sky rarely causes them to rise up and overthrow their own government. Instead, the shared trauma of facing an external existential threat usually forces a deeply divided population to unify and rally around the flag, regardless of how oppressive that flag might be.
The anger is entirely redirected upward at the bombers, not inward at the leadership.
Exactly.
So the U.S. may have inadvertently saved the internal legitimacy of the Iranian regime by giving the populace a common enemy. But while the physical infrastructure of Iran was burning to the ground, Tehran was preparing to play its ultimate trump card at sea.
They unleashed what one defense analyst called a weapon of mass economic destruction.
And this brings us to the geography of the Strait of Hormuz, which became the fulcrum of the global economy. Let's visualize the map for a second for the listener.
Okay.
The Persian Gulf is this massive body of water bordered by major oil-producing nations like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, and the UAE. But there's only one way out to the open ocean: the Strait of Hormuz.
And Iran controls the entire northern coastline of this strait.
At its narrowest point, the strait is only 21 miles wide. But the actual deep-water shipping lanes that the massive supertankers use are only 2 miles wide in each direction. It is the ultimate geographic bottleneck. And Iran closed it.
The economic shockwave was instantaneous and historic. To understand the leverage Iran holds, you have to look at the volume of energy that passes through that 2-mile wide lane.
It's massive, isn't it?
Before the war, 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas, or LNG, and 25% of the total global supply of seaborne oil transited the Strait of Hormuz every single day.
And when you choke off a quarter of the world's oil supply overnight, the markets don't just react, they panic. Oil spiked to a peak of $126 a barrel.
The largest single-month increase in oil prices in recorded history.
That immediately spiked the U.S. Consumer Price Index, sending inflation through the roof. The cost of everything transported by truck or ship skyrocketed.
But the ripple effects went far beyond the gas pump. The restriction of LNG had a devastating secondary effect on global food security.
How so?
Natural gas is the primary raw ingredient used to synthesize nitrogen fertilizers. When the LNG supply dropped, fertilizer plants in Europe and Asia had to shut down. The global fertilizer market collapsed, drastically reducing crop yields and threatening famine in vulnerable, import-dependent nations.
Entire industries were thrown into chaos. Commercial airlines suddenly had to reroute thousands of flights to avoid the airspace of half the Middle East. That meant longer flights, carrying less cargo, burning significantly more fuel.
And with jet fuel prices soaring due to the oil spike, the profit margins vanished.
It actually pushed Spirit Airlines, a major American low-cost carrier, straight into bankruptcy by May of 2026. They simply couldn't afford to fly their planes.
In response to this global economic strangulation, the United States military attempted to force the strait open, resulting in what naval historians now call the dual blockade.
The dual blockade. How exactly do you blockade a strait that is already being blockaded by the country that owns the coastline? It sounds like a giant maritime Mexican standoff with billions of dollars of cargo floating in the middle. How did the mechanics of this actually work?
It was a brutal war of economic attrition. The U.S. Navy launched Project Freedom. They positioned massive guided missile destroyers and aircraft at the entrance to the Gulf. They could easily intercept and stop any ship attempting to go into Iranian ports.
Effectively cutting off Iran's ability to import refined fuel or export their own oil.
Right, so the U.S. stops ships from reaching Iran.
Okay, but what about ships trying to leave?
Well, the U.S. Navy couldn't stop Iran from deploying cheap, asymmetrical area denial weapons. Under the cover of darkness, Iranian fast boats and submarines began quietly seeding the narrow shipping lanes with hundreds of sea mines.
Ah, so the water itself was trapped.
Furthermore, Iran possesses hundreds of anti-ship missile batteries hidden in caves along the mountainous coastline. If a third-party commercial supertanker, say one from Japan or South Korea, tried to leave the Gulf filled with Saudi oil, Iran would threaten to blow it out of the water.
So if you were a civilian ship captain commanding a massive, slow-moving container ship, you were essentially trapped.
Exactly. Insurance companies immediately revoked coverage for any vessel entering the Gulf, which ground commercial shipping to an absolute halt. The only ships moving were doing so illegally and desperately.
Doing what exactly?
Massive commercial cargo vessels were resorting to turning off their automatic identification systems, their GPS trackers. They would literally hug the coastline of Oman, sailing through dangerously shallow waters in the dead of night, praying they could sneak past Iranian coastal radar without hitting a sea mine.
But this dual blockade was a double-edged sword. It was causing global economic agony, but it was also suffocating Iran. The material notes that Iran only had 13 days' worth of commercial oil storage capacity.
Because the U.S. destroyers prevented them from exporting anything, those storage tanks filled up immediately.
And once they were full, Iran was forced into the catastrophic position of having to physically shut down their own oil extraction fields.
Which is terrible for the infrastructure. Capping a pressurized oil well is incredibly difficult.
It was costing the Iranian government an estimated $435 million a day in lost revenue.
It became the ultimate geopolitical staring contest. Who could withstand the extreme economic pain longer? The global markets reeling from inflation and supply chain collapse, or the Iranian state burning through its final cash reserves.
And as this kinetic, physical war ground into a grinding economic stalemate, a bizarre and totally unprecedented second front opened up online.
The information war.
This is perhaps one of the most uniquely modern and disturbing aspects of the 2026 conflict. We saw the deployment of artificial intelligence on a massive scale, used specifically to distort reality and manipulate public perception.
It was everywhere.
It felt like the complete gamification of actual human suffering. The White House, in an attempt to maintain domestic support for the war, started releasing these hyper-produced propaganda videos on social media.
But they weren't just showing raw footage.
No, they were literally editing real, lethal airstrike footage, together with computer-generated clips from military video games and high-octane Hollywood blockbusters. They added heavy musical tracks. They designed it to look and feel exactly like an action movie trailer.
The intention was to sanitize the violence. If the war feels like a video game, the public becomes psychologically detached from the horrific reality of the collateral damage we just discussed.
But the blending of entertainment and lethal military force provoked a massive cultural backlash. The American pop star Keisha actually had to issue a public demand forcing the U.S. military to stop using her hit song Blow as the soundtrack for montages of Iranian infrastructure being annihilated.
It's surreal, but Iran was playing the exact same game, just tailored to their audience. They fought back with their own bizarre media.
What did they do?
The IRGC released a fully AI-generated animation depicting the destruction of U.S. bases in the region, and even a recreation of the Manav school attack. But the entire animation was rendered to look like Lego bricks.
Lego bricks? Are you serious?
Yes. You are scrolling your social media feed, and within 3 swipes, you literally cannot tell if you are watching a promotional ad for the new Call of Duty, an AI-generated Lego movie, or actual footage of a geopolitical crisis where thousands of people are dying.
And that is exactly how AI permanently altered the fog of war. Historically, the fog of war referred to the confusion and lack of situational awareness on the battlefield. But in 2026, the fog was intentionally manufactured to blind the global public.
When every single video, every audio leak, every photograph can be dismissed as an AI deepfake, objective truth ceases to exist. Everything becomes entirely subjective.
Which brings us to the bizarre saga of Benjamin Netanyahu and the deepfake paradox. Iranian state media, utilizing their segmented internet, started pushing a massive rumor that the Israeli prime minister had actually been killed in a secret retaliatory strike.
The rumor caught fire globally.
To prove he was still alive and leading the country, Netanyahu's office posted a casual video of him sitting at a well-known cafe in Jerusalem. He's holding up his hands, sipping a cappuccino, and makes a joke saying he was dying for coffee.
And the reaction to that video perfectly encapsulates the danger of the AI era.
Right. The internet immediately, collectively, decided that the video of him proving he was alive was itself an AI deepfake.
People were analyzing the shadows on the coffee cup, looking for digital artifacts around his fingers.
The situation became so absurd that the cafe owner actually had to release grainy, closed-circuit security camera footage just to prove to the world that the prime minister had physically been in the building.
AI experts call this the liar's dividend. When the public knows that flawless AI generation exists, bad actors don't even need to create fake videos anymore. They can just claim that genuine, damaging footage of themselves is AI generated, and a large portion of the public will believe them.
And the intelligence agencies capitalized on this confusion heavily, right?
Oh, absolutely. The Israeli intelligence agency, Mossad, had an entire dedicated psychological warfare unit deploying localized AI deepfakes into Iranian social networks to sow distrust among the IRGC ranks.
But this unchecked information war had severe, terrifying domestic implications inside the United States as well. The fog of war was used as a direct pretext to threaten press freedom.
Yes. The U.S. government was deeply concerned about losing the narrative war at home, especially as inflation spiked from the oil blockade. The chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, Brendan Carr, took unprecedented action.
What did he do?
He publicly threatened to revoke the broadcast licenses of major U.S. media outlets and news networks if they were found to be spreading fake news or distorting the coverage of the war.
That is a staggering overreach. If the government is the entity producing the hyper-edited video game propaganda to sanitize the war, and that same government holds the power to pull the plug on journalists who report on the actual civilian death toll by labeling it fake news, the traditional checks and balances on military action simply evaporate.
That is the most terrifying extrapolation from the 2026 conflict. The militarization of truth.
If the public cannot agree on basic facts, if they are being entertained by the conflict rather than informed about the human cost, does it make it easier for a superpower to wage endless, destructive wars without ever facing public pushback?
It's a dark thought, but yes. Fortunately, the domestic pressure in the U.S. did eventually mount, primarily driven by the screaming global economy.
The U.S. Congress was getting restless. Both the House and the Senate passed acts threatening to mandate a cessation of war operations unless the president formally gained congressional approval, which he did not have.
Right. With the domestic economy bleeding, truth completely distorted, and the military stalemate in the Strait of Hormuz continuing, the diplomatic back channels finally had to deliver a way out.
Which brings us to the resolution of the acute phase of the conflict, the signing of the Islamabad Memorandum.
Mediated by Pakistan.
Yeah, Pakistan stepped in as a neutral third party to mediate the indirect talks between Washington and Tehran. After intense, grueling 21-hour negotiation sessions, both sides agreed to terms.
But the contrast in the visuals of the signing ceremonies tells you everything you need to know about the political spin.
The optics were heavily engineered.
Very much so.
President Trump flew to France. He signed the memorandum while having a lavish dinner with the French president at the Palace of Versailles. Meanwhile, the new Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian, signed the exact same document sitting at a desk in Tehran.
Choosing the Palace of Versailles was a highly calculated move by the U.S. administration. Versailles carries massive historical weight. It is the venue historically used to dictate crushing terms to defeated empires.
Like the Treaty of Versailles ending World War I.
Exactly, dismantling the German Empire. By signing it there, Trump was projecting the image of a conquering emperor.
He explicitly characterized the agreement as an unconditional surrender by Iran to the American people. When you actually read the terms of the deal they agreed to, it paints a completely different picture.
It really does.
The U.S. agreed to a 60-day suspension of all hostilities. They agreed to lift the naval blockade of the Gulf, allowing Iranian oil to flow again. They granted major financial concessions, unfreezing billions in Iranian assets.
And critically, despite the entire war being launched over the threat of Iran's military capabilities, Iran explicitly retained its ballistic missile programs, its drone manufacturing, and its nuclear enrichment infrastructure.
The financial world, dealing with the fallout of the oil crisis, openly mocked the U.S. administration's capitulation. Wall Street traders were using acronyms like TACO, which stood for Trump always chickens out, and NATO, meaning not a chance Hormuz opens.
So we are left with a massive contradiction that historians will debate for decades. How can the U.S. president call it a magnificent victory while foreign policy experts and defense analysts almost universally categorize the memorandum as a total strategic defeat for the United States?
Let's break that down. Who actually won the war of 2026?
To answer that accurately, you have to separate tactical victory from strategic victory. Did the United States and Israel win tactically? Unquestionably.
They demonstrated absolute terrifying air superiority.
Right. They penetrated one of the most heavily defended airspaces on Earth. They destroyed thousands of Iranian military targets with impunity. They severely crippled the country's energy infrastructure, and they successfully assassinated the supreme leader and the top echelon of the military brass in a single morning.
By any standard military metric of destruction, that is overwhelming tactical dominance.
But war isn't just about breaking things, it's about achieving political objectives.
So
Strategically, the consensus is that Iran won. The primary stated goal of the United States and Israel when they launched the decapitation strike was regime change. They wanted the Islamic Republic to collapse.
But the regime survived. The IRGC maintained total internal control.
And in surviving, Iran proved something incredibly dangerous to itself and to the world. It proved that it could absorb a massive, sustained, full-scale military onslaught from the United States and Israel, the worst they could possibly throw at them short of a nuclear weapon, and not break.
In doing so, Iran permanently lost its fear of a conventional war with America.
And more importantly, they demonstrated that they didn't need to match the US plane for plane or ship for ship to win a standoff. They demonstrated their ultimate trump card.
Exactly. They proved to the globe that they have the asymmetrical ability to hold the entire global economy hostage simply by throwing sea mines into the Strait of Hormuz.
The US Navy, despite possessing the most immense maritime firepower in human history, could not easily force that strait open without risking a wider regional catastrophe and the sinking of commercial supertankers.
The United States was ultimately forced to make major financial and diplomatic concessions to Iran simply to stop the economic bleeding at home.
The contrast between the propaganda and the reality is striking. You have the sheer grandiosity of the US president signing the treaty at Versailles, projecting total global dominance to the cameras. But the reality on the ground was that Iran walked away with crippling sanctions relieved, its regime intact, its ballistic missile programs active, and its grip over a vital global waterway completely solidified.
And while the ink is dry on the Islamabad memorandum, the underlying tensions were never resolved. The conflict isn't truly over. Skirmishes in the Strait of Hormuz continue daily.
Commercial ships are still occasionally struck by unidentified drones or hit naval mines. The entire region remains on a permanent razor's edge, waiting for the next spark.
Wow. Okay, let's pull back and wrap up this incredibly dense deep dive. We started by looking at a powder keg built on decades of interference, paranoia, and proxy warfare. We saw how a preemptive decapitation strike meant to achieve swift, decisive regime change, instead entrenched a bruised but completely unbowed Iranian state.
It's a huge shift.
We unpacked the stunning tactical deception, the spoofed satellites and hidden generals that allowed for the element of surprise. But we also spent time confronting the horrific realities of modern warfare, the shift to indiscriminate cluster bombs, the tragic failure of intelligence at the MENAB school, the erasure of ancient cultural heritage sites, and the long-term devastation of toxic black rain.
Really devastating.
We explored the surreal, dystopian gamification of the information war, where AI deepfakes and video game footage intentionally blurred the lines of truth, threatening the very foundations of press freedom. And finally, we saw how the terrifying fragility of the global economy was exposed by the dual blockade, proving that in the modern interconnected world, economic pain is the ultimate weapon.
It was a conflict that thoroughly redefined modern asymmetric warfare and brutally exposed the limits of traditional military superpowers in an age of economic choke points and artificial intelligence.
And so, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final lingering thought to ponder as you go about your day. For decades, the entire world was absolutely terrified of an Iranian nuclear bomb. We obsessed over the ingredients sitting on the counter. We launched cyber attacks, levied sanctions, and eventually started a war to prevent them from turning on the oven. But the war of 2026 proved that Iran didn't actually need a nuclear weapon to hold the world hostage.
No, they didn't.
Their ultimate weapon wasn't enriched uranium, it was geography. By simply tossing cheap explosives into a 21-mile wide stretch of water, Iran deployed a true weapon of mass economic destruction. It was as sudden and devastating as the sky turning black over Tehran on that February morning. So as the world licks its wounds and tries to rebuild from the fallout of 2026, the question we have to ask is this: how will global superpowers completely redesign their energy grids, their alliances, and their supply chains so that a single, narrow strait can never hold the entire planet hostage again?
That is the question of the century.
Thank you for trusting us to guide you through this incredible material. Keep questioning the world around you, look past the headlines, and we will see you on the next deep dive.